Hi, and welcome to another story. Today we have Animalcolm by David Baddiel, starting from the very beginning, Chapter 1, Enormous Furry Ears. Happy birthday to you, happy birthday to you, happy birthday dear Malcolm. Now, this is normally the moment at which the birthday child, whose name in this case, as you may have worked out, is Malcolm, would blow out the candles on their cake. But the Baileys, that was his full name, Malcolm Bailey, had a family tradition, which was that they also sang happy birthday when giving the children their birthday presents. So this song wasn't being sung at a party, and it was not accompanied by a cake. It was just Malcolm's mum and dad, Jackie and Stuart, his grandpa Theo, his teenage sister Libby, and his little brother Bert, on the morning of his 11th birthday, standing in a circle in the living room round a box covered in wrapping paper, which actually did have printed candles on it. Malcolm waited for the singing to finish. It was a bit of an annoying tradition, to be honest, because what he wanted to do was tear open that wrapping paper, because he knew that inside the box was what he really wanted, a laptop computer. He had given his parents the exact specification, an FZY Apache 321, high-def screen, 4.0 GHz processor speed, quad speakers with Nahimic virtual sound surround, the fastest and coolest and baddest laptop on the planet. He could almost see it in his hands, touch its LED display, black backlit keyboard. Happy birthday to you. Smiling at his family, Malcolm reached over to pick up his present. Finally, he thought, for he's a jolly good fellow, for he's a jolly good fellow. Malcolm leant back, away from the present, still smiling, but through gritted teeth. Do they normally do this bit? He thought. For he's a jolly good fellow, and so say all of us. Great singing, guys. Good job, thanks, said Malcolm, reaching forward for the present again. And so say all of us, and so say all of us, for he's a jolly good fellow, and so say all of us. His mum and dad and grandpa and sister and brother harmonised surprisingly well, actually, on the word us, making Malcolm think the song must at last be over. Not wishing to be disappointed again, he waited 5 seconds, in case it wasn't. But everyone was just smiling. In fact, his mum was nodding encouragingly at the present. Great, thought Malcolm, and tore open the wrapping. Oh yes, that computer, with its shiny, sleek aluminium cover, and its hypersensitive touchpad, and its enormous furry ears. Malcolm frowned, screwing up his noticeably blue eyes. Its enormous furry ears. He didn't remember reading that specification when he was flicking through photos on baddiscomputer.net. But before he could quite work out what was going on, all the others were bending over and putting their faces very close to what was being revealed as the wrapping came off, which was not, in fact, a computer, or even a cardboard box containing a computer, but a cage. Isn't he the cutest thing? His mum was saying. Look at that sweet face, his dad was saying. Oh my God, I want to stroke him, his sister was saying. I want to eat him, his little brother was saying. He reminds me of Lord Kitchener, his grandpa was saying. Sorry, said Malcolm. What is this? Well, Malk, said Jackie. Mum? Sorry, I've told you, Mum. Malcolm didn't like being called Malk. He wasn't sure why, possibly because it rhymed with talc, and thus made him think of talcum powder, which was something he had once seen his grandpa putting down his pants. Sorry, Em. That was what his mum, who liked to give her children nicknames, sometimes called him instead of Malk. Malcolm was all right with that. He's a chinchilla, she continued. And not just any chinchilla, said Stuart. He's an Andean Lanigera. Pardon? Said Malcolm. That's the breed. It means he's from the Andes in South America. That's the best type. The ones that make perfect pets. Malcolm looked down at the little creature. It was mainly white, with bits of speckled grey around its nose. It had round, sticky-out ears and a big fluffy tail. It was sitting up on its back legs, looking up at him hopefully. The chinchilla, like Malcolm, had very blue eyes. Those blue eyes seemed to widen as they saw Malcolm, like the animal had realised instinctively exactly whose pet it was meant to be. Malcolm looked back at the chinchilla. It could have been a special moment. A moment when boy and chinchilla and boy, could really have bonded. Time stretched as blue eyes met blue eyes, through the bars of the little cage. But then, Malcolm turned away, shaking his head and tutting. Right. OK, he said. So, where's my Apache 321? Chapter 2. 700 cats, 800 dogs and 5 giraffes. Your what? Said Malcolm's dad. My laptop that I asked for. I wrote it on my birthday list and everything. Sorry, Malcolm, said his mum. What birthday list? The one I stuck up on the kitchen wall. Oh, said Malcolm's sister, Libby, in her bored voice, which was the one she used most of the time, when not cooing over cute animals. I think Ticky may have ripped that down a few days ago. when she was play fighting with Tacky. The cat's ripped down my birthday list. So where is it now? I think Chewy may have eaten it, said his dad. The dog ate my birthday list. Either the dog or the hamster. Marvin wouldn't eat that, said Grandpa. Would play havoc with his digestion. Actually, I think I may have put it on the floor of the iguana's cage. Sorry, Malcolm, said his mum. Oh, only I didn't realise that's what it was. I just thought it was some bits of paper, and you know how Nana likes to scratch around in bits of paper. But, said Malcolm, getting more and more frustrated, we've already got loads of animals. We've got 2 cats, a dog, a hamster and an iguana, which most people would say is enough pets. Said Jackie, you can't have enough pets. Exactly, I agree, said Stuart. Yeah, YOLO, said Libby, who used a lot of those acronyms. Yes, Siri, said Grandpa Theo. I want to eat him, said Bert. Even the chinchilla seemed to nod, its enormous ears flapping up and down as it stared quizzically at Malcolm from inside its sparkling new cage, which had a water bottle attached to the outside, and a running wheel, and a mirror inside. Right, said Malcolm, let's just look at that statement for a moment. You can't have enough pets. So, if we had 700 cats, and 800 dogs, and 5, I don't know if you can keep them as pets, but I imagine if you could, you, Mum, would soon be off to the pet shop to get them. Giraffes! Would that be enough pets? Well, said Stuart, as long as they were all house-trained. I don't think we could get a litter tray big enough for that many cats and dogs, Stuart, said Jackie, to say nothing of the giraffes. Grandpa frowned. I wouldn't like to see a giraffe use a litter tray, even if it was big enough. He shook his head. Bottom's too far off the ground. TD, said Libby. Hello, said Malcolm. Are we seriously discussing the pros and cons of getting 700 cats, 800 dogs, and 5 giraffes now? But this question was never answered, because the chinchilla, who later that day would be christened Chinny Reckon by Stuart, after a funny phrase he used to say at school in the 1970s, started running on the running wheel. Oh my GTT, said Libby, crouching down next to the cage. That's so cute. Look at his little nose, said Stuart. And his adorable enormous ears, said Jackie. Actually, he doesn't look much like Lord Kitchener, said Grandpa Theo. I want to eat him, said Bert. 11-year-old Malcolm watched the chinchilla running in its wheel for a moment. The chinchilla looked back at him, but kept running, almost as if it wanted Malcolm to be impressed. Look, said Jackie, he loves you. Malcolm looked at his family, clucking and cooing over the new pet. A part of him wanted to join them, to be in that group hug around the cage, but another part of him couldn't. Yes, said Malcolm quietly. Thing is, I don't love him, and for extra emphasis, a bit like the Terminator in one of Malcolm's favourite films, does when he says hasta la vista, he said it again, but in Spanish, a language he had just started to learn at school. Yo no lo amo. As ever, when he tried to tell his family how he felt about animals, no one seemed to hear him, so he sighed and turned away and walked down the hallway towards his bedroom, passing on his way the family's 2 cats, Ticky and Tacky, their dog Chewy, their hamster Marvin and their iguana Banana. As it happened, someone in the living room had heard him, someone with enormous ears, someone who could hear words even when they were said quietly, someone who, when Malcolm said, Yo no lo amo, stopped running on his wheel, got off, and went and sat in the corner of his cage, facing the wall. Chapter 3. Mini coloured munchballs. Malcolm lay back on his bed, looking out onto the street. He could still faintly hear the sound of his family making cute noises around the cage, now added to by the click-click-click of his sister's phone, which meant that she was taking selfies, pouting with the chinchilla in the background. He could also hear another very tinny animal noises, so he assumed that Bert must have got hold of his dad's phone. Malcolm's family did not have much money. His mum worked as a receptionist at the local vet's, and his dad designed apps, none of which had been very successful. The only one that had got onto the Apple Store was called Animal SFX, which was one where you pressed on some cartoon animals and it would make the sounds of those animals. No one really played with it anymore, except Bert, which meant that along with all the other animal noises in the house, Malcolm could also hear an artificially created donkey, cow and elephant. This just made him more depressed. He wondered why his family never got the message about him and animals. After all, he thought, looking around the room, his walls were the only ones in the house that didn't have animal pictures on them. Libby's and Bert's bedrooms were covered in cute animals, and cute images of kittens and puppies and seals and bears and penguins, and you know, all the animals. His parents' bedroom didn't have animal posters on the wall, but they did have lots of family photographs, and every family photograph included the pets. Even Grandpa's room had a painting in it of some dogs playing poker. Malcolm felt quite bad about it. He knew kids were supposed to like animals. He knew people were supposed to like animals. He knew that not liking animals generally made other people think that you were a bad person. And anyway, He didn't not like animals, really. He just didn't really get animals. Most of them seemed to lie around eating and sleeping and not doing anything useful. He had watched Ticky and Tacky, or possibly Tacky and Ticky. Even though one was mainly brown and one was mainly white, Malcolm was always unsure which was which, for long periods of time, and had never seen them, for example, read a book, or make a cake, or design a fantastic computer, or do any of the things that he was interested in. Even now, as he looked out the window, he could see some pigeons in the street doing that stupid pigeon thing of hanging around in the middle of the road, waiting until the last moment of a car approaching, before flying away. Why did they do that? But because his family so liked animals, and had so many animals, and went on so much about animals, sometimes, like now, he felt like he really did not like animals. He sometimes wondered, in fact, if his mum and dad preferred animals to children, or at least to him, their one child who wasn't obsessed with animals. At those moments, he sometimes felt like he hated animals. He didn't like to admit that, but he knew that at those moments it was true. There was a knock on the door. Malcolm didn't answer. "Malc," came his mum's voice from behind the door. "Mum," he said. "Sorry, Em. Are you okay? Are you asleep?" "Clearly not," replied Malcolm. "That makes a change," she said. "Can we come in?" said Stuart. "Is the chinchilla with you?" Malcolm heard some whispers, some scuttling, and the sound of a cage door being locked. "No," said Stuart, eventually. "OK," said Malcolm. The door opened and his family shuffled in, holding out, like peace offerings, Malcolm's other presents. Malcolm, immediately forgiving them for the chinchilla, greedily opened them. They were caring for a chinchilla, a guide, chinchilla treats, 5 kilograms, mini-coloured munchballs for chinchillas, 5 of them, all different colours. Controlling himself quite well at first, Malcolm looked up from these presents and said, "Thanks. No, really, thanks. I really appreciate it. Anything not to do with chinchillas?" Jackie and Stuart exchanged glances. Of course," said Stuart, handing over another present. Malcolm unwrapped it suspiciously, and then held up what was inside and looked at his parents. "It's a chinchilla," he said. "A cuddly toy chinchilla." "No," said Jackie. "I'd say it's a rabbit, wouldn't you, Dad?" "Yes, or maybe a big-eared hamster?" "Right, yes, a big-eared hamster. Maybe we should call it, Hammy Big Ears?" said Stuart. "LOLTT," said Libby. "Exactly," said Jackie. "Hello, Hammy Big Ears. Look at your cute big hamster ears." "Right," said Malcolm. "So when you bought this cuddly toy, you weren't sure what kind of animal it was meant to be. It had no label of any kind. It wasn't in any particular section of the cuddly toy shop. Perhaps the CH section, just after cheetahs and chimpanzees?" "Can I eat it?" said Bert. "I think that clinches it," said Malcolm, tossing the toy to Bert. "It's a chinchilla." And with that, he lay back on his bed, with his arms crossed, looking up at the ceiling. "Mum, Dad," whispered Libby, "you know why Malcolm's like this, DC?" She lowered her voice to an even lower whisper, made lower still because of her bored voice, which was like someone speaking through a yawn. "It's 'cause of the monkey moment, IKEA." "No, it's not," said Malcolm. The whisper had clearly not been whispery enough. Jackie and Stuart exchanged glances. "It probably is, isn't it, Stuart?" Jackie whispered. "Yes, darling, I think we all know it is," Stuart whispered back. "I think because of the monkey moment," said Jackie. "Yes, the monkey moment. Perhaps Malcolm still feels a bit traumatised around furry creatures." "The whispers aren't working," said Malcolm. "I can hear you. It's a small room. And it's got nothing to do with a monkey moment. Stop saying the words monkey moment." "What monkey moment?" said Grandpa. "Oh, Dad, we've told you 100 times," said Jackie. "Tell me again," said Grandpa. "You know how I forget things." Malcolm sighed and looked out of the window at a pigeon flying away from a car bumper at the last second. Chapter 4. The Monkey Moment. So the family told Grandpa again. Thoughtfully, they went back into the living room and left Malcolm in his bedroom, as they didn't want him to have to relive the trauma of the monkey moment, even if he said he wasn't traumatised by it. "Well, Dad," said Jackie, "when Malcolm was 6, we went on one of our regular Sunday trips to the zoo, and he loved seeing the animals then, didn't he, Stuart?" "Yes," said Stuart. "I remember him running up and down by all the cages, smiling his biggest smile. So the animals he really wanted to see were the monkeys." "Fair dues," said Grandpa. "They are the top animal in a zoo." Everyone nodded in agreement. "And when we got there, to the monkey house..." "Monkey house, yes," said Grandpa. He was really excited. "CGI," said Libby, nodding in agreement, but in a way that suggested that she could barely be bothered to nod. "What does that one mean?" said Grandpa. "Crazy gagging for it." "Right, you are." And so he ran right up to the cage, the one with all the chimpanzees in it. And the chimpanzees were all rolling about, and swinging from ropes and jumping through tyres, and chasing each other along the tree trunks. "Sounds great," said Grandpa. "Can I eat them?" said Bert. And Malcolm loved it all. He was so happy. He loved it so much. In fact, that he started clapping. At this point, Jackie paused and looked a bit troubled. "Yes," said Grandpa. "Then what happened? Don't stop there. INTK." "Well," said Jackie, "when Malcolm clapped, all the chimpanzees stopped what they were doing, and then one of the biggest ones, the dominant male, I think." "Louis," said Stuart hopefully. "That was his name. I remember reading it on the little placard outside the cage. They'd got him from a zoo in Frankfurt. Yes, all right, Louis. He, For a moment, it looked like Jackie was going to cry. Stuart came over and put his arm around her. Libby yawned. Bert found a piece of fluff on the floor and put it in his mouth. "You don't have to continue if you don't want to, darling," said Stuart. "No, it's fine. I'll be fine." She took a deep breath. Louis picked up some of his poo from the floor and threw it in Malcolm's face. Grandpa nodded with a very serious expression, and then he nodded some more, making his face even more serious. Then he started laughing. "Grandpa," said Stuart, "sorry, but, He couldn't carry on the sentence. He started gulping for breath in between the laughs. "The monkey plop splattered on the bars of the cage," said Jackie, "but that didn't stop him getting it all over his face. It's not funny, it was awful." Grandpa carried on laughing, and then Stuart started, and then Bert joined in, while also repeatedly pressing the monkey icon on Animal SFX on Stuart's phone to create the sound of a chattering monkey. Even Libby stopped looking bored and started smiling. "Stop it. Why are you all laughing?" said Jackie. And then all the other chimps joined in. That was everybody else laughing. "LOLT 27. "Stop it," said Jackie. They all looked around. 20 chimps. And they all picked up bits of poo and all threw it at the same time at Malcolm. It was like a huge battalion of medieval soldiers catapulting cannonballs at a castle. Except it wasn't medieval soldiers, it was monkeys. And it wasn't a castle, it was Malcolm's face. And it wasn't cannonballs, it was... That, unfortunately, was Jackie, joining in with the laughter. "Poo," she finally finished. "It was poo," she said again, irrelevantly, to be honest. "Monkey droppings, chimp plop, Planet of the Apes poo-poo. That was everyone else. So, having a nice time, that was Malcolm. Everyone looked around. Malcolm was standing at the door to the living room, with his arms crossed. The rest of the family fell silent, for almost 12 seconds. And then they all started laughing again, in that way that people do when they're trying not to. Laughter bursting out of them like jets of air from an overfull balloon that someone is releasing, then pinching closed, and then releasing again. It's made worse, that type of laughter, if you're the object of it, because it sounds like the people laughing are not just laughing at you, but blowing raspberries as well. Went Malcolm's family. Chatter, 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 scream, 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 went Animal SFX in Bert's hand. Malcolm shook his head, raised his eyes to heaven and turned to go back to his bedroom. "Hang on, Malcolm," said Stuart. Sorry. We're all really sorry, aren't we?" "Yes," said Jackie. "Yes," said Grandpa. "STTM," said Libby. "Can I eat sorry?" said Bert. "But look," said Stuart, "if it helps, we do have one more present." "Is it a chinchilla hat?" said Malcolm, not turning around. "A chinchilla keyring? Tickets to Chinchilla, the musical?" "No, it's got nothing to do with chinchillas at all. Nothing." Slowly, Malcolm turned around. He looked at his father suspiciously. "All right, then," he said. Chapter 5. The Last Present. Stuart walked over to Malcolm and then took something out of his pocket and handed it over. The last present. It was slim, perhaps some kind of card, wrapped up in the candles paper. "Aha," thought Malcolm. "A voucher. I can use that to buy the Apache 321. "Oh, thanks, Dad," he said, as his fingers took off the sellotape on the back. "And Mum, sorry, I didn't mean to be ungrateful about the chinchilla. Can we go to the shops today with the vouch?" Malcolm stopped speaking, as the word vouch ended on his lips, never to be added to with an He frowned, looking at the piece of card, on which were many, many pictures of animals. For the second time that day, Malcolm looked up in confusion at his beaming parents. "It's a card that we all made together," said Libby. "BT, be thankful." "Oh, that's nice." "Look inside," said Jackie. "We saved up." Malcolm looked inside. There were more pictures of animals, plus the words, "Happy Birthday." There was also a piece of paper folded up. "Ah," he thought, "the voucher, right." Malcolm unfolded the piece of paper. It wasn't a voucher, it was an invoice from his school. He knew this because the words Bracket Wood Primary School were printed on top of it. On the main bit of the paper were the words, Year 6 school trip, with a stamp across them that said, paid. Malcolm looked up. "Oh, thanks." He meant this, even though it wasn't a voucher that he could use to buy an FZY Apache 321. Malcolm knew that his mum and dad would have struggled to pay the £300 required for the Year 6 school trip. In fact, He looked at the invoice, and it occurred to him that possibly it was a good thing that Ticky and Tacky had torn down his birthday list, and it had been spread on the bottom of Nana's cage, as maybe he realised now his mum and dad couldn't actually afford an FZY Apache 321. And Malcolm did want to go. The Year 6 trip was exciting. It was 3 days long, the first time he'd been away from his family, and most other children he knew would be going. So he would have sounded more enthusiastic about his thanks were it not for the fact that he didn't actually know where the school trip was going to this year. So he said, "No, really, Mum and Dad, thanks. That's really, really nice of you. By the way, I know I should know this, but where is it to this year? The trip?" Said Jackie and Stuart, both at the same time. 1 week later. Chapter 6. We're here! The Bracket Wood Primary School coach was having trouble getting down the hill. This might seem unusual. You would expect most vehicles as old and creaky as the Bracket Wood Primary School coach to have trouble getting up this particular hill, a hill in the middle of the countryside renowned for its steepness, and of course it had done when it had driven up the other side. The climb had taken an hour and a half, and at one point most of Year 6s started screaming, "It's going to roll backwards! It's going to roll backwards!" and cowering under their seats. But once over the top, even the rustiest rust bucket should be able to just glide all the way down. As it was, though, it seemed less to glide than to cough and splutter. None of this was helped by the weather, which, though it was spring, was rainy and foggy. Malcolm sighed, closed his eyes, and tried to rest his forehead on the shuddering window. Up ahead, he could see a flock of sheep running away from them as the coach belched its way forward. The vehicle finally managed to gain some speed and pass the sheep, but Malcolm noticed that they carried on running, even though there was nothing behind them anymore. In fact, that they were now basically chasing the bus they were supposed to be running away from. Some boys at the back, a boy called Barry and his friends Lucas, Jake and Taj, turned round to point at the sheep, running away from nothing, and laughed. But Malcolm just felt annoyed at the stupidity of the stupid sheep. Eventually, they made it to the bottom of the hill and their destination. "We're here," said the teacher, Mr. Barrington, peering out of the front window. "I think," he said, I think partly because his eyesight was not the best. He had very, very thick glasses, and partly because the sign he was looking at was obscured by mist. And, as he said, I think, the mist cleared to reveal the words, Orwell Farm. "Yes, this is definitely the place," he said. "Drive on, driver, quick smart. Let's waste no more time getting the children out of this bus, onto the farm, and starting to look after all the animals." "Hooray!" went all the children. Well, all except one. Chapter 7. Stinky Blinky. "So, everybody, the last animals on our tour, and the last animals you'll be helping us to look after while you're here are the goats." Gavin, who ran Allway Farm, who had been giving Year 6 their first trip around it, proudly gestured towards the pen behind him. All the children, except for Malcolm, peered towards the animals. "Does anyone know what we get from goats?" continued Gavin. A girl called Ellie put her hand up. "Yes," said Gavin. "Milk, that's right." "I thought cows produced milk," said her twin brother Fred. "And burgers," said Maurice Fawcett, who was also in Year 6, although some people thought he should go back to Year 1, where he would almost certainly be more comfortable. "They don't produce burgers, Maurice," said Maurice's sister Isla. Maurice frowned. "I thought beef came from cows." "It does." Maurice frowned even more. "Well, how do they make it then?" Gavin smiled, which made his beard, he had a big bushy beard and wore a flat cap even though he was quite young, go up at the sides. "We get milk from goats as well. We make our speciality cheese out of it." Maven, who may or may not have been Gavin's wife, but who ran the farm with him, held up a plate on which rested a big triangular piece of what looked like rotting soap. "Stinky Blinky!" Said the various children. Even though they were out in the open air, a few of them covered their mouths and noses so as to avoid the terrible scent of cheesy goat wee. "We sell it in the local artisan market," said Maven. "Goes like hotcakes. Who wants a bit?" The children all looked down. Malcolm, though, was already looking down at his watch. The time was 5:43 p.m. He had known that for a while, well, at least since it was 5:42 p.m. But he wasn't looking at his watch to find out what the time was. He was looking at his watch because he wasn't interested in what Gavin or Maven were saying about the goats. He hadn't been interested in what Gavin or Maven had said about the chickens either, or the sheep, or the cows, or the horses, or the sheepdog Trotsky, or the farm cat Zaza, or the tortoises Benny and Bjorn, which they kept not because they were from farm animals, but just in Gavin's words, for giggles. He, Malcolm, still couldn't see the point. The animals just walked or sat around in their pens looking at the humans, while the humans looked back at them. It was like a very dull episode of Big Brother, which was a show he never watched because it was very dull. No, Malcolm wasn't looking at his watch to check the time. He was looking at his watch to check the date and thinking, 3 days. 3 days till I can go home. Meanwhile, Gavin and Maven had walked over to either side of one of the goats. It was a very old-looking goat with a very long, tufty beard, not entirely unlike Gavin's. It had a sad face and bulging amber eyes. "This old guy, though," Gavin said, "he's our favourite. He might even be our favourite animal on the entire farm." "We call him K-Pax," said Maven. "Do any of you kids know that movie?" Year 6 collectively shook their heads. "Oh, it's great," said Gavin. "We love it." "Yeah, so we found K-Pax when we were trekking in the Himalayas," said Maven. "And the village were going to slaughter him, which would have been gross. Yeah, gross. I mean, they weren't even going to sell the meat originally, organically at the local market or anything. So," said Maven, "we bought him and shipped him back to live with us here at Orwell Farm." Malcolm raised his eyes from his watch. They felt heavy with boredom. "Anyway," Gavin continued, "because he's so old and he's seen so much of the world, we think K-Pax is really wise and clever. So, if any of you have any questions, any big life issues you've been wondering about, ask him now." There was a long pause. Year 6 collectively looked back down at the ground, not because Maven was still holding up the Stinky Blinky, although she was, but because all the children were a bit embarrassed about the idea of asking a goat a question. Malcolm shook his head and imagined it. "Hello, K-Pax. Can you please tell me what life holds for me? Should I follow my dreams of being a great inventor of computer games, or settle for being someone whose apps never get made, like my dad?" "Sorry, what's that you say?" "Bah, bah, bah." "Oh, and you've done a stinky goat wee. Great, thanks." "Right," said Gavin. "First tour over. Everybody back to the farmhouse for..." Malcolm finally looked up. At least there would be nice food, and he was peckish. "Stinky blinky sandwiches," said Maven. Chapter 8. K-Pax. Led by Gavin and Maven, Year 6 shuffled off towards the farmhouse, which was an old thatched building encircled by all the various animal pens. Malcolm, suddenly less peckish, watched them go. He let out a deep sigh. At this moment, 3 days felt very long indeed. "Hey, Malcolm, you coming?" said Barry. "Yeah," said Malcolm, about to join his classmates, when he stopped, because he had a weird sense that someone was watching him. He looked around but couldn't see anyone. He shrugged and tried to think nothing of it. But no, he could feel eyes on him, somewhere. And then he realised where. Straight in front of him. The goat. K-Pax had come over to the edge of the pen and was leaning his head over the small fence. His bulging amber eyes were, it seemed, trained on Malcolm, staring at him. "Stop looking at me like that," said Malcolm. But K-Pax didn't. He kept looking. Well, of course he's still looking, thought Malcolm. He's an animal, and one of the most boring things about animals is that they don't speak English. So Malcolm tutted and stared right back into K-Pax's eyes. "OK, tell you what," he said. "Let's pretend that Gavin and Maven are right, and you, K-Pax, are really, really wise. Then answer me this. Every other kid in the world loves animals. Every other person in the world, it seems, loves animals. But I don't. I'm sorry, I don't mean to offend you, or any of your other furry friends, but I just can't see the point of you." During this speech, K-Pax just carried on listening, imperviously, occasionally munching on some much chewed-up grass. If he was offended, he didn't, it has to be said, show it. He continued simply to stare into Malcolm's eyes. Malcolm, even though he knew it was silly, got a strange feeling that the goat was actually staring at him, staring into his soul. He didn't want to feel that. He particularly didn't want to feel that about an animal who he knew couldn't possibly be doing it. So he made a point of leaning in even closer to K-Pax's snouty white face. "So, K-Pax, my question is, why is that? Why don't I love animals? And more importantly, how, in order to be like everyone else, am I ever going to learn how to love them?" After Malcolm asked this question, K-Pax seemed for a second to shut his eyes, almost as if he was thinking about it. But it was so quick it may have been a blink, and when he opened them again, his eyes looked bigger and bulgier than ever. It had actually felt quite a relief for Malcolm to finally say this stuff out loud. These were things he felt very deeply, but most of the time kept to himself. But once it was out and the goat was just looking back at him, Malcolm thought, "This is just stupid. I may as well be talking to a brick wall." Plus, there was quite a strong scent of Stinky Blinky coming from, well, Malcolm didn't really want to think about where it was coming from, so he started to back away. Except he couldn't. It was weird. It was like he was rooted to the spot. The ground was a bit dirty around the pen. Maybe his wellies had sunk into the mud. He made to look down at his feet, but he couldn't do that either. He couldn't, in fact, take his eyes away from K-Pax's eyes. It was like he was being hypnotised by a goat. This seemed very unlikely to Malcolm, seeing as perhaps the one thing he knew for certain about goats was that none of them had been trained in hypnotherapy. But one or two things about the situation really did seem like hypnotism. Other eyes looking deep into yours, while you looked into them. For example, not being able to look away. And this was probably the big one. Suddenly feeling very, very sleepy. And that is the end of part 1 of Animalcolm by David Baddiel. I'll be back soon with the next part of this fantastic story and lots more stories and videos coming your way very soon. If you'd like to subscribe or hit a like, that's always appreciated. Thanks for listening, guys. Take care. Bye-bye.